The shock was immediate. I felt the cold weight of the phone in my hand, as though it had become a foreign object. My thumb hovered over the screen, barely able to comprehend what I had just read. The message was clear, detached, and final. "We don't want anything to do with you anymore. You made your choice." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my chest, thick and suffocating. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a sharp crack, echoing in the silence of my living room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to make sense, to somehow offer me a way out of this nightmare. But there it was, in cold black text. My children, the ones I had given everything to, telling me they no longer wanted me in their lives. I grabbed the phone from the floor, trembling. My fingers shook as I tried to dial their numbers. I had to hear their voices. I needed an explanation, anything that would make sense of this. But the phone rang and rang, unanswered, as if they had already erased me from their world entirely. My chest felt tight, as if the walls of the house were closing in around me. I leaned against the counter, my head spinning. How? How did this happen? I thought I was doing everything right. I had given them everything I had, spent years sacrificing, building a future for them. I had taken the difficult steps, made the tough choices, all for them. And now this devastating betrayal. I stood up straight, trying to steady myself, but my legs were weak. I had to see them. I had to understand. I grabbed my coat and left the house without a second thought, the chill of the evening air doing little to soothe the burning fire of panic inside me. I arrived at my son's apartment, breathless, my pulse still racing. I knocked, my knuckles tapping against the wood of the door with a hollow sound. There was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door opened a crack. His face, so familiar, looked at me through the sliver of space. His eyes cold, distant. "Mom," he said, his voice flat, no warmth, no love. I tried to speak, my voice shaking with desperation. "Please, just tell me what happened. What did I do wrong?" He stepped back, his expression never softening. "You really don't get it, do you?" he asked, his words cutting through me like a blade. "You sold us your love, Mom. You made it about money, about your savings. We didn't need that. We needed you." I felt the world spin around me. Sold? I was confused. I did it for you, for us. I thought you'd be happy. Why can't you see that?" "No, Mom," he snapped, his voice hardening with anger. "We don't want your money. We wanted a mother, not a business partner. You chose them, not us." The words stung like acid on an open wound. I wanted to argue, to explain that everything I did for them, for their future, their well-being. But no words came. I was left standing there, speechless, the overwhelming weight of their accusations suffocating me. I tried to reach out to him, desperate, but he took a step back, as if my very presence disgusted him. The door slammed shut before I could say another word. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling as though the ground had been ripped out from under me. I had no answers, only emptiness. The rush of emotions that flooded through me, confusion, disbelief, anger, sorrow, churned together in a chaotic storm. I was drowning in it, unable to catch my breath, but then something caught my eye. In the corner of the room there was a box, a dusty old box I had almost forgotten about. I stepped toward it almost mechanically and opened the lid. Inside, there were old letters, faded photographs, souvenirs from another time. Time before everything had fallen apart. Time before I had given so much of myself to my children. Time before I had convinced myself that this family was what I had been working for all my life. I picked up one of the photos. It was a picture of me as a little girl, a time before I had learned what it meant to sacrifice, before I had learned to be strong. There was a woman standing next to me, her arms around me, smiling, my mother, but her smile was nothing like the warmth I had hoped for, nothing like the comforting embrace I had given my own children. I had grown up in a house where love was scarce, where affection was a commodity. My mother had never been able to give me the support I had craved, and now here I was, repeating the cycle, loving my children with the same desperation that I had once longed for. The realization hit me hard, deep. The betrayal I felt now wasn't just a result of my children's rejection. It was a reflection of my own childhood, of the patterns I had inherited. Had I ever really known how to love? Had I ever really known how to build healthy relationships? Or had I just been repeating the same mistakes over and over, trying to fill a void that could never be filled? The answers eluded me, leaving only a bitter taste in my mouth. But I knew, somewhere deep inside, that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated, a journey to unravel the tangled mess of my past and present. And the road ahead, I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but I would have to be. There was no other choice now. My children had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. The weight of the world felt unbearable. I had never known such an emptiness, such a crushing despair. It seemed like everything I had ever worked for, everything I had given, was being swallowed whole by the darkness that now surrounded me. My children, the ones I had poured my heart and soul into, had turned their backs on me, and with each passing day, I felt myself sinking deeper into the abyss. I had tried to reach out, tried to find comfort in the people who once claimed to be my friends. But the faces were no longer familiar. The warmth I had once felt in their presence was gone, replaced with a cold, detached distance. Each attempt at conversation, each invitation to coffee or dinner, felt like a performance, a charade that no one was willing to play. They didn't want to hear my pain. They didn't want to understand my grief. The emptiness in me grew. I tried other things, things I had once been too proud to consider. I signed up for self-help seminars, motivational courses, anything that promised to bring me back to life. Rediscover your inner strength, they said. Transform your life. It all sounded so simple, so achievable in theory. But when the words were spoken, they seemed to hold no weight. They felt hollow, empty promises made by people who were more interested in my money than my well-being. I wasn't stupid enough to believe they had the answers, but at least the thought of change, of hope, kept me going, even for a little while. There were moments, though, when the mask slipped, when I found myself alone in my apartment again, surrounded by the very emptiness I had been trying to escape. I would sit by the window, staring out at the world that seemed to move on without me. The sounds of the city felt distant, foreign. Everyone else seemed to have a place, a purpose, and here I was, adrift in a sea of loneliness. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. A message arrived from an old acquaintance. I hadn't heard from him in years, but I remembered him well. We had crossed paths once before, back when I still believed that people could be trusted, that there was something real in the world. He offered me something. A lifeline, he said. There's a psychological training I'm involved in, he wrote. It's designed to help people like you, people who've been hurt, who need to heal. It could help you find yourself again. I was skeptical, to say the least. I had seen the glossy brochures, the empty promises before. How many more people could I trust? How many more times could I allow myself to be hurt? But something about his message pulled at me. Maybe I needed this just one more time. Maybe this would be the key to unlocking the person I used to be before everything fell apart. I agreed to join the training, though the doubt in my mind was like a constant whisper, reminding me not to get my hopes up. The first day, I sat in the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the faces of the others. They all looked so eager, so hopeful. And then the trainers walked in, the experts who were supposed to guide us to inner peace. They smiled, their eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. They spoke of self-discovery, of peeling back the layers of our pain to reveal a new, stronger self. It all sounded so rehearsed, so practiced, but I went along with it, hoping foolishly that maybe this time something real would emerge from the haze. The exercises began, and I followed along, though the whole thing felt like a performance. They asked us to share our stories, to open up about our deepest hurts. I spoke hesitantly at first, but then with more passion, explaining how my life had fallen apart, how my children had turned away from me. I poured out my pain, expecting understanding, support, anything that would make me feel less alone. But what I got in return was nothing more than a sales pitch. They handed me pamphlets, talked about exclusive sessions, the next steps in the process, and it hit me all at once. This wasn't about healing, it was about money. These people didn't care about me. They cared about selling me more hope, more courses, more promises. It was a business, just like everything else in my life had become. I left that day feeling more betrayed than ever, my heart heavy with the realization that once again I had been deceived. I had reached out, only to have my hopes dashed against the jagged rocks of reality. This wasn't the answer. It never was. The days that followed blurred together. I went through the motions, trying to convince myself that something would change, that I would find a way out of this spiral. But every step forward felt like a lie, a shadow of the hope I once held. And then, during one of the last training sessions, something caught my attention. I had just finished another empty exercise when I noticed her. A woman sitting across from me, her eyes filled with the same emptiness I had seen in the mirror. She looked familiar. Her sadness mirrored mine. She too seemed to have been broken, torn apart by the same kind of betrayal. We made eye contact for a moment, and without a word, I could feel the unspoken understanding between us. We started talking after the session, sharing pieces of our stories. Her name was Linda, and like me, she had been abandoned by those she loved. She spoke of her family, her children, her failed attempts to rebuild her life. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of connection, a thread of understanding that I hadn't felt with anyone else. But as we continued to talk, something shifted. Linda's words began to sound less like comfort and more like a carefully crafted pitch. She too was selling me something, her own brand of hope, her own way of healing. It became clear that she wasn't here to offer support. She was here to take advantage of me, just like everyone else. I walked home that day feeling more alone than ever. The weight of the betrayal, of the manipulation, pressed down on me with crushing force. I had hoped that Linda might be my salvation, my chance at rebuilding what I had lost. But in the end, she was just another person trying to use me. And just as I was beginning to lose all hope, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my son. "We need to talk." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart skipped a beat, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Could this be the beginning of something new? Was this the chance I had been waiting for? I didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The weight of my past still clung to me like a heavy fog, but I knew I had to keep moving forward, even if I wasn't sure where I was headed. The chaos of my emotions, the anger, the sorrow, the disappointment, all of it was still there, swirling inside of me. Yet, beneath it all, there was a small, flickering light, a tiny whisper that told me there was a way out. I began my search for peace in the most unlikely of places. Silence. I had never been one for quiet moments, always too busy with the noise of life, the demands of others, the constant need to do something. But now, it was the silence that called to me. I started meditating, sitting still, closing my eyes, and trying to push everything away. I focused on my breath, trying to ground myself, trying to find some semblance of control in the whirlwind inside me. At first, it was difficult. My mind was a battlefield, constantly pulling me back into memories, into the hurt. But over time, something began to shift. The anger I carried, the pain, began to lose some of its grip on me. It was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but I started to understand it, to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. I knew I couldn't change the past, but perhaps I could change how I viewed it, how I carried it. I also started meeting new people, joining groups for self-development, attending workshops and retreats. I was desperate for connection, for understanding. I thought that perhaps by surrounding myself with others, I could heal. But the more I tried, the more I realized that no one could heal me but myself. Everyone had their own battles, their own wounds. I couldn't expect them to fix mine. And yet, in some of these groups, I found glimpses of hope. There was a woman in one of the workshops who spoke about her own journey of betrayal. Her voice was soft, but there was a strength behind it that caught my attention. She spoke of how she had lost everything, her family, her friends, but had eventually found her way back to herself. Her story touched me in a way I hadn't expected. It was as though she had somehow stepped inside my soul, and I could feel her pain echoing inside of me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life too. I began to trust again, to open up, to believe that there was something out there for me, something beyond the pain. But as the days passed, I began to feel a familiar tension. Another woman in the group, someone I had started to grow close to, kept dropping hints. She was always talking about new opportunities, ways to invest, ways to rebuild, but each suggestion seemed to come with a catch. She spoke with such enthusiasm, her eyes wide, her voice filled with the promise of success, but there was something in the way she spoke, something that made me feel uneasy. She didn't just want to be my friend, she wanted something else, and I could feel it. Her interest in me wasn't entirely about helping me, it was about what I could offer her. I began to pull away to keep my distance. I realized that as much as I longed for connection, I couldn't let my desperation lead me down the same path again. I had been manipulated before, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. I needed to learn how to trust myself, how to find peace within, without relying on others to fill the void. And so I returned to my practice of meditation, my quiet moments of self-reflection. I spent more time alone, listening to my own thoughts, exploring the depths of my soul. It was hard at times, the loneliness, the uncertainty, but with each passing day, I began to feel stronger. I was no longer seeking external validation or approval. I was learning to validate myself. It was during one of these quiet moments that my phone buzzed, breaking the stillness of my thoughts. I looked at the screen and saw his name. My heart stopped for a beat before it began to race. It was my son. "I want to meet," the message read. I stared at the words, feeling a rush of emotions flood through me. A part of me wanted to jump at the chance, to rush to him, to beg for his forgiveness, to heal the rift between us. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to rebuild myself, felt something else, a sense of calm. I didn't need him to fix me anymore. I didn't need him to validate my worth. For the first time, I understood that I could face whatever came next without losing myself. Whether he came back into my life or not, I had already found something more important, peace within myself. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'll meet you." But this time it wasn't a plea, it wasn't desperation. It was simply a step forward, one more piece of my journey. And whatever came from it, I knew I was strong enough to handle it. The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the park bench where I sat, my hands wrapped tightly around the warmth of my coffee cup. It had been years since I'd seen these people, the old friends, the ones I had once been so close to, but now I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they still see me the way they had before? Would they remember me as I was, or had I changed too much for them to recognize? I felt the weight of my past pressing on my chest again, but I tried to push it away. This was supposed to be a new chapter, a chance to reconnect, to look back on what had been, and move forward, stronger. And yet, even as I tried to convince myself that I was ready for this, doubt crept in. What if these old bonds were just fragile threads, easily snapped in the face of all that had happened? One by one, they arrived. The faces were familiar but weathered, their smiles a little more guarded than I remembered. It wasn't just me who had changed. Time had done its work on all of us. We spoke of old memories, laughing about things that once seemed so important, like a shared secret no one could ever forget. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension, the unspoken words hanging between us. Had they felt the same distance I had, the weight of the years that had passed, the unhealed wounds that never seemed to fully close? At first, the reunion felt almost comforting. There was a brief sense of relief in seeing them again, as if this small act of returning to something familiar could somehow undo the years of pain and loneliness. But then, as the conversation deepened, the cracks began to show. It was during one of these moments, when the conversation had turned to more serious matters, that I saw him. Jason, a friend from my past, someone who had been so close to me in my younger years, someone who had been there for so much. But as soon as I laid eyes on him, the memories came flooding back, the shared history, the betrayals, the things I had tried so hard to forget. I felt my stomach tighten, my pulse quicken. Jason had always been a part of the background, the one who had somehow been woven into the fabric of my family, into the very things that had caused so much pain. In some ways, he was just as much a part of the problem as the people who had hurt me. He had been there, in the shadows, never offering a helping hand when I needed it most. And now here he was, sitting across from me, pretending that the years had not changed anything, that everything was fine. "You look good," Jason said, with a forced smile, his eyes scanning my face as if he were searching for something. "I'm glad you reached out. I know it's been a while." I nodded, trying to hold my composure. "It has been a long time." For a moment there was an awkward silence. I could feel my thoughts racing, my heart pounding in my chest. What was he doing here? Why now? I had been hoping for a fresh start, but instead I was faced with the very thing I had been running from. The conversation drifted on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled back into the past, into a place I had fought so hard to escape. Jason talked about how much he'd changed, how he'd learned from his mistakes, how he could help me find my way again. But something in his voice, something in the way he looked at me, felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the words didn't match the intentions behind them. And then it hit me. Jason had never really been on my side. He had never truly understood the weight of the things I had gone through. He had always been part of the problem, someone who had watched from the sidelines, never stepping in when I needed help. He was offering support now, but it felt like a half-hearted attempt, a way to ease his own guilt rather than help me. I tried to push the feeling away, but it stuck with me, like a shadow that refused to leave. As we talked, the walls between us seemed to grow thicker, the distance greater. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine, that we could just pick up where we left off. The reality was harsher than that. The truth was, I couldn't trust him. Not anymore. And yet, despite everything, a small part of me longed for what we once had. I wondered if I was being too harsh, too quick to judge. Wasn't that what I had been doing with everyone, pushing them away before they could hurt me again? But deep down, I knew the answer. I had to let go. I couldn't keep clinging to the past, to people who didn't truly see me or support me. I had to keep moving forward, even if it meant leaving some people behind. I had to find my own way on my own terms. Later, as I walked home, the weight of the conversation lingered. My mind raced with questions. Could I ever forgive those who had hurt me? Could I really rebuild my life, or was I forever bound to the shadows of my past? It was then that I realized something that had eluded me for so long. The pain, the memories, the betrayals, they were a part of me. They had shaped me, yes, but they didn't define me. I could carry them, but I didn't have to let them control me. I didn't have to keep letting the past dictate who I was or what I could become. And so, with each step I took, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. The past would always be there, a part of my story, but it no longer had the power to break me. I had found a new strength, not in forgiveness, not in reconciliation, but in acceptance, and with that acceptance, I could finally begin to look forward. When I got home, my phone buzzed again, and I saw another message from my son. "I'm ready to talk." This time, when I read those words, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel hesitation. I simply felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next, whatever choice I would make, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. The night was silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, a heavy weight that makes it hard to breathe. I sat on the edge of my bed, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across the room, and my thoughts churned inside me, relentless. It had been a long, exhausting day, filled with decisions, with doubt, with the kind of emotional weariness that could only come from confronting everything I had avoided for so long. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. I stared at it for a long moment before reaching for it. The name on the screen froze me. My son. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me, the part that had spent years giving, sacrificing, hoping for things to change, wanted to pick up the phone, to hear his voice, to fall back into the familiar dance of trying to make things right. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different, but I knew better. I took a deep breath and pressed the green button. "Mom," his voice was shaky, uncertain. I I know things have been hard, but I want to help. We can fix this. We can start over. I've been thinking about everything and My heart thudded painfully in my chest, but I interrupted him, my voice steady, even though I could feel the rush of emotion building inside me. "No, you can't," I said quietly but firmly. "I've already given all that I can give. I can't keep doing this." I could hear his breath catch on the other end of the line. I could almost see him standing there, searching for the right words, the words that would pull me back into the past, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't go back to that place, to those relationships that had never truly been healthy, no matter how much I had tried to fix them. "You don't understand," he said, his voice softening with frustration. "We're family. You can't just give up on us." I could feel the weight of his words pressing against me, but I stood my ground. "I haven't given up on you, but I have to stop giving up on myself," I replied, my voice quieter now, but with a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of before. "I can't keep sacrificing myself, hoping things will change. It's not healthy for me. I deserve better. We all do." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear the faint sound of his breathing, shaky and uneven. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away from everything?" I felt the sting of his words, but this time it didn't break me. "I'm not walking away from you," I said, the words feeling like they were etched into my soul. "But I can't keep letting my happiness depend on something that's never going to change." The call ended abruptly, the silence that followed more deafening than any words could have been. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse still racing, my heart pounding with the rawness of what I had just done. I sat there in the stillness of my room, letting the weight of my decision settle over me. It wasn't a decision I had come to lightly. It was one I had fought with every part of me, torn between the love I had for my children and the need to protect myself, to rebuild my life without constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. I couldn't do it anymore. And as much as the guilt gnawed at me, as much as I wanted to believe that I could have done more, that maybe I could have been a better mother, I knew deep down that this was the only way forward. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself to people who didn't see me, who didn't appreciate me. For the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of something I had almost forgotten: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from resolution, from fixing things. It was the peace that came from knowing I had finally made the right choice for myself. I wasn't perfect, and I hadn't been the perfect mother, but I had been trying to make it work, even when it was clear that I couldn't fix everything. The peace I felt wasn't complete, though. There was a sorrow deep in my chest, an ache that wouldn't go away. I mourned the loss of the family I'd hoped for, the relationships I had once believed would sustain me. And yet, I knew that this was the only way for me to move forward. I had to let go. I had to stop living in the shadows of what might have been. And so, in the quiet aftermath of that call, I sat with myself, not as a mother, not as someone who had been betrayed, but as a woman who had finally found the courage to choose her own happiness. It wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The sun was rising once again, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. I stood by the window, looking out over the city below, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. It had been months since I had made that final decision, the one that had completely turned my life around. Every day since then had felt like a new chapter, one I had written for myself, free from the chains of guilt, the fear of judgment, and the endless struggle to please everyone around me. I had begun to build something new, a life that was mine with no obligations other than to myself. I had started small, taking each day as it came, finding the courage to step out of my comfort zone and embrace the unknown. At first, it was just the little things: going to the local cafe and ordering my favorite coffee, taking walks in the park, reconnecting with the parts of myself that I had forgotten in the chaos of the past. And then, as I found my footing, I began to reach out to others, people who didn't know my story, people who saw me for who I was now, not who I had been. One day I met a group of women who had experienced their own struggles, their own heartaches. We met through a community gathering, a place for women to share, to listen, to heal. At first, I was hesitant, unsure if I was ready to open up again, but when I listened to their stories, their pain, and their hope, something inside me shifted. They weren't just strangers to me, they were reflections of my own journey, and in them, I found support, understanding, and encouragement. They helped me see that the pain of my past wasn't something to be buried or forgotten. It was part of who I was, and it could be used as a source of strength, not weakness. They encouraged me to embrace the lessons I'd learned, to transform my hurt into something positive, something that could propel me forward instead of holding me back. With their help, I began to believe that my past had shaped me, yes, but it did not define me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly supported. I felt like I belonged, like I wasn't alone in this. These women helped me see that I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I was enough just as I was. And then, just when I thought I had finally found my balance, I got the call. My phone buzzed, breaking the calm I had so carefully built. I picked it up, and there it was. My daughter's name on the screen. My heart sank, a wave of unease crashing over me. It had been so long since I had heard from her, and the distance between us still felt too raw, too fresh. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure whether to answer. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect the peace I had found. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, still hoped for reconciliation, reached for the phone. "Hello?" I answered, my voice steady but cautious. "Mom," she said, her voice shaky as if unsure of how to continue. I I need your help. Something's happened and I don't know who else to turn to." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the old familiar pull that had always made me drop everything for her. My heart tightened, the old patterns threatening to take hold again. I wanted to rush to her, to fix everything, to be the mother I had always tried to be. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't the same person I had been. I had learned to put myself first, to protect my peace. "Mom, please," she begged, her voice almost breaking. "I don't know what to do. I need you." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had been here before, caught between the desire to help and the need to protect myself. I had been here too many times, always giving, always sacrificing, always expecting something in return that never came. "I'm sorry, sweetie," I said, the words feeling like they were cutting through me. "I can't help you this time. I can't keep doing this for you. I've given everything I could, but I need to live for myself now." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear her trying to process my words. "You're serious, aren't you?" she whispered. "Yes," I replied softly. "I'm serious. I've done everything I could, and now it's time for me to live for me. You need to find your own way, just like I had to." I hung up the phone, the finality of my words ringing in my ears. It wasn't easy. The guilt, the love, the memories of everything I had sacrificed for her, they all threatened to pull me back, but deep down I knew I had made the right choice. I had learned that I couldn't pour from an empty cup. I had to be whole, for me, before I could help anyone else. As I stood there in the quiet of my room, I felt a strange peace settle over me. It was a peace that came not from the absence of pain, but from the understanding that I had taken control of my life. I had made a choice, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of love for myself. I was finally ready to live for me. The quiet hum of the morning settled around me as I stood by the window, watching the world slowly wake up. There was a peace I had not known in a long time, a calm that ran deeper than the surface of the day. For the first time, I wasn't caught in the undertow of my past, wasn't drowning in memories of what could have been. I was free. The journey had been long, filled with moments of doubt, of fear, of heartbreak. But it had also been filled with growth, with the discovery of who I truly was. I had learned to let go of the weight I'd carried for so long, the weight of expectations, of guilt, of the need to prove myself to others. I had finally understood that my worth didn't depend on anyone else's recognition. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was valuable. I had discovered my own value. And in that discovery, I had found something else, happiness in its purest form. It wasn't the kind of happiness that came from external validation, from fixing the broken pieces of my past. It was the kind of happiness that came from within, from knowing I was enough just as I was. The pain of my past no longer controlled me. It was simply a part of my story, but it didn't define me. I was free to create a new future, one where I could stand tall, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who had chosen to heal, to grow, and to embrace life on my own terms. I had begun to rebuild my life not around others, but around myself. I made choices based on what felt right for me, without fear of disappointing anyone, without worrying about what others thought. I had started over, and the world felt vast with possibility. Every new day brought a chance to explore, to learn, to discover new things about myself, about what I wanted, about what truly brought me joy. But then, just as I was beginning to feel stable, to feel like I was truly standing on solid ground, the phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart skip a beat. It was my son. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear. I hadn't heard from him in months, and the silence between us had felt like a permanent gap, one I hadn't known how to bridge. And now, here he was, reaching out. My heart ached with the weight of it, the pain of years lost, the unspoken words between us. I had worked so hard to let go of the idea that I needed him to complete me, to validate my existence. But now, in the space between the ring and the voice on the other end of the line, I felt everything I had buried start to surface again. Mom, his voice was hesitant, unsure. I've been thinking a lot. I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you. I know I hurt you, but I want to make it right. Can we talk? Can we try to fix things? His words were like a flood, rushing back all the emotions I thought I had buried, the longing for reconciliation, the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest. I had worked so hard to rebuild myself, to live without the weight of my past. And now, here he was asking for another chance. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I could feel the old patterns pulling at me, the old need to fix, to give, to sacrifice for someone else. But this time, I didn't feel that desperate need. I had learned too much about myself, about my own worth, to fall back into those old traps. I don't know if I can do that, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I've been through too much to go back to what we had. I can't keep repeating the same mistakes. I've learned that I can't keep sacrificing myself, hoping things will change. I've found peace, and I can't let you take that away from me. There was a long pause, and I could hear the pain in his voice. Mom, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Please don't shut me out. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. It wasn't easy. It wasn't the decision I had wanted to make, but in that moment I knew it was the right one. I can't do it anymore, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I can't keep allowing myself to be hurt. I need to live for me now. The call ended, and the silence that followed was profound. For a moment I simply stood there, the phone in my hand, feeling the echo of the words that had just been spoken. It wasn't a rejection of him, not truly. It was a rejection of the pain, of the endless cycle of betrayal and sacrifice that had kept me tethered to a past that no longer served me. And then something shifted inside me. It wasn't a feeling of regret or sorrow. It was a feeling of peace, of clarity. I had made the right choice. I had chosen myself. I had finally learned that my happiness, my peace, couldn't come from anyone else. It had to come from within me. The weight that had been pressing on my chest, the weight of guilt, of longing, of fear, suddenly lifted. I was free. Free from the need to fix the broken pieces of my past, free from the desire to prove my worth to anyone. I had found my own worth, my own strength. As I stood there, I thought about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. I was no longer burdened by the past. I had let go, and in that moment I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I've finally taken back my life, I thought to myself, standing on the threshold of a new beginning, and with that thought, I took the first step forward into the future, leaving behind the pain, the doubts, and the fears. I was ready to embrace the unknown, to write my own story and to live a life that was truly mine.